Right now, 94% of people are learning backwards, and schools taught them to do it. That's not an exaggeration. That's not motivation speak. That's what researchers at MIT discovered after analyzing how people actually acquire new skills versus how they were taught to learn in school. The gap is staggering. And if you've ever felt like you study for hours but nothing sticks, if you've ever watched someone else pick up a skill twice as fast as you, if you've ever thought maybe you're just not a fast learner, this chapter is about to change everything. Because here's the truth no one told you. You're not slow. You're not lacking talent. You're not missing some genetic gift that fast learners have. You've simply been using a broken system. A system designed over 100 years ago. A system that was never built for learning at all. And in the next 13 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why that system failed you and what to do instead. Let me take you back to 1870. The Industrial Revolution is in full swing. Factories need workers, not thinkers, not innovators. Workers, people who can follow instructions, sit still for 8 hours, memorize procedures, and repeat tasks without questioning. So what did society do? It built schools that looked exactly like factories. Rows of desks like assembly lines. Bells that ring to signal shift changes. Subjects broken into disconnected chunks. And a learning method based on one assumption. Repeat information enough times, and it will stick. This is the system you inherited. This is why you were taught to read a chapter, highlight the important parts, reread your notes, and cram before the test. It's why you believe that more hours equals more learning. It's why you think forgetting means failure. But here's what the factory model never accounted for. Your brain is not a factory. Your brain is not a machine that gets better with repetition. Your brain is a prediction engine, a pattern recognition system, a biological supercomputer that learns through completely different mechanisms than what schools taught you. And when you force a prediction engine to operate like a repetition machine, you get exactly what you've been experiencing. Frustration, forgetting, the feeling that learning is a struggle instead of a natural process. Let me give you a number that will reframe everything. According to research published in the Journal of Educational Psychology, students who use traditional study methods, rereading, highlighting, passive review, retain only 15 to 20% of material after 1 week. 15 to 20%. That means 80% of your study time produces nothing lasting. But here's where it gets interesting. The same research found that students who used brain-aligned techniques retained 65 to 80% after the same period. Same material, same time investment, 4 times the results. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't talent. It wasn't hours spent. It was method. Now, let me show you what this looks like in practice. Average learners approach a new skill like this. They consume information passively. They watch videos. They read books. They attend courses. They accumulate knowledge like they're filling a bucket, believing that more input equals more learning. And then they wonder why the bucket has holes. Elite learners do something completely different. They understand that consumption is not learning. Processing is learning. They know that their brain doesn't store information like a hard drive. It builds connections. And connections are built through specific triggers that most people never activate. This is the first major shift. Stop thinking of learning as information transfer. Start thinking of it as connection building. Every fact you learn is looking for other facts to attach to. Every skill you develop is searching for patterns to recognize. When you learn in isolation, through passive consumption, those connections never form. The information floats in short-term memory and then vanishes. But when you learn through connection, through active processing, through the techniques I'm about to share with you over the next 9 chapters, the information locks in permanently. Here's a practical example. Let's say you're trying to learn a new software tool for your job. The average approach is to watch tutorial videos from start to finish, maybe take some notes, and then try to remember everything when you actually need to use it. 2 weeks later, you've forgotten 70% of what you watched. The elite approach is radically different. Before watching anything, you prime your brain by asking specific questions you need answered. You watch in short segments, immediately applying what you learned. You deliberately wait before reviewing, using strategic forgetting to strengthen retention. You connect new features to tools you already know, building pattern bridges. Chapter 2. Neural Priming, the PRE Learning Advantage. Elite learners start learning before they start studying. Here's their secret. If you watch two people sit down to learn the same skill, same material, same time, same environment, you'd assume they'd get similar results. But they don't. One person absorbs information like a sponge. The other struggles to retain even basic concepts. And the difference isn't intelligence. It isn't prior knowledge. It isn't even focus. The difference is what happened in the 5 minutes before they started. This is the hidden advantage that separates rapid learners from everyone else. It's called neural priming. And once you understand how it works, you'll never approach learning the same way again. Let me explain what's happening inside your brain when you encounter new information. Your brain is not a blank recorder waiting to capture whatever comes in. Your brain is a prediction machine. Every second of every day, it's running simulations, making guesses about what's coming next, and preparing responses before events even happen. This is how you catch a ball without consciously calculating trajectory. This is how you finish someone's sentence before they complete it. This is how you navigate a familiar route without thinking about each turn. Your brain predicts. And then it compares predictions to reality. When there's a match, information flows smoothly. When there's a mismatch, your brain pays extra attention because mismatches signal something important, something worth remembering. Here's why this matters for learning. When you sit down to study something completely cold, no context, no framework, no expectations, your brain has nothing to predict. It's operating blind. Every piece of information is equally foreign, equally disconnected, equally forgettable. Your brain doesn't know what's important because it has no reference point for comparison. But when you prime your brain first, when you give it a framework, a set of questions, a rough map of the territory, everything changes. Now your brain has predictions to make. It has expectations to confirm or contradict. It has hooks to hang new information on. Research from Stanford's Memory Lab demonstrated this effect in a striking experiment. They gave two groups the same educational video to watch. The first group watched cold, with no preparation. The second group spent just 5 minutes beforehand reviewing key questions the video would answer and scanning major topic headings. The results weren't even close. The primed group retained 47% more information after 1 week. Same video, same viewing time. The only difference was 5 minutes of preparation. 5 minutes. 47% more retention. This is neural priming in action. Now let me show you what average learners do versus what elite learners do, because the contrast is dramatic. Average learners treat learning like passive consumption. They open a book and start reading from page 1. They press play on a video and watch from beginning to end. They show up to a course and wait to be taught. Their brain is in reception mode, waiting for information to arrive, hoping something sticks. Elite learners treat learning like active hunting. Before they read a single page, they scan chapter titles and headings. Before they watch any video, they review the description and write down specific questions they need answered. Before they attend any course, they identify exactly what problems they're trying to solve. Their brain is in prediction mode, generating expectations, creating frameworks, building scaffolding for new information to attach to. The difference in approach creates a difference in results. And that difference compounds over time. Here's the neuroscience behind why this works. When your brain makes a prediction and then receives confirming or contradicting information, it triggers a specific neural response. Confirming information strengthens existing pathways. This is how patterns become automatic. Contradicting information triggers dopamine release and heightened attention. This is how surprises become memorable. But here's the key. You can't confirm or contradict a prediction you never made. Without priming, there's no prediction. Without prediction, there's no enhanced encoding. Without enhanced encoding, information floats in working memory for a few minutes and then disappears. Neural priming creates the conditions for your brain to do what it does best. You're not fighting your biology. You're leveraging it. Let me give you a concrete example of how this applies to real-world learning. Imagine you're trying to learn data analysis for your job. You've got an online course with 30 hours of video content. The average approach is to start with lesson 1 and work your way through sequentially, treating each video as a self-contained unit. The elite approach looks different. Before watching anything, you spend 10 minutes scanning the course outline. You identify the 5 or 6 major concepts the course covers. You write down specific questions based on challenges you're actually facing at work. Questions like, how do I clean messy datasets? What's the fastest way to spot outliers? How do I present findings to non-technical stakeholders? Now when you watch the videos, your brain is hunting. It's looking for answers to specific questions. It's comparing what's taught to predictions you've already made. It's flagging moments where your assumptions were wrong, because those moments of surprise create the strongest memories. Same course, same content, radically different results. Now I want to give you the exact protocol I recommend for neural priming. This is the 5-minute sequence that transforms passive consumption into active acquisition. Step 1. Preview the structure. Spend 60 to 90 seconds scanning headlines, chapter titles, video descriptions, or course outlines. You're not trying to learn anything yet. You're just building a rough map of the territory. Your brain needs to know the shape of what's coming. Step 2. Generate questions. Spend 60 to 90 seconds writing down 3 to 5 specific questions you want answered. These should be real questions connected to real problems you're facing. Not generic questions like, what is machine learning? But specific questions like, how can machine learning help me predict customer churn? The more personally relevant the question, the stronger the priming effect. Step 3. Activate prior knowledge. Spend 60 seconds asking yourself what you already know about this topic. Even if you think you know nothing, you know something. You have related experiences, adjacent knowledge, assumptions, and beliefs. Bringing this existing knowledge to the surface creates connection points for new information. Step 4. Set a prediction. Spend 30 to 60 seconds making a guess about what you'll learn. What do you think the main takeaway will be? What do you expect to be surprised by? It doesn't matter if your prediction is wrong. In fact, wrong predictions often create stronger learning because the surprise triggers enhanced encoding. Step 5. Declare your intention. Spend 15 to 30 seconds stating out loud or writing down exactly what you intend to do with this knowledge. Not, I want to understand data analysis, but I'm going to use this to build my first customer report by Friday. Intention creates relevance. Relevance drives retention. Total time, 5 minutes. Expected impact, 40 to 50% increase in retention. That's the protocol. Simple enough to use before any learning session. Powerful enough to transform your results. Now let me address a common objection. Some people hear this and think it sounds like extra work. They think, I barely have time to study. Now you want me to spend time preparing to study. Here's the reframe. You're not adding time. You're reallocating time from ineffective learning to effective learning. Those 5 minutes of priming don't add to your study session. They replace the first 5 minutes of unfocused consumption that would have been wasted anyway. And here's the math that matters. If priming increases retention by 47% and you're studying for 1 hour, you're essentially getting an extra 28 minutes of results from the same time investment. 5 minutes of preparation creates 28 minutes of additional value. That's not extra work. That's leverage. Elite learners understand this instinctively. They know that how you start a learning session determines how much you retain from it. They never approach new material cold because they've seen what happens when they do. Information goes in one ear and out the other. Here's another contrast between average and elite learners. When average learners finish a study session and realize they remember almost nothing, they blame themselves. They think they weren't focused enough, weren't smart enough, didn't try hard enough. They assume the problem is internal. Elite learners blame the process. They know that poor retention is a signal that something in their approach was wrong. Usually that they skipped the priming phase or rushed through it. They don't waste energy on self-criticism. They adjust their method and try again. This mindset shift is crucial. Your results are not a reflection of your intelligence. Your results are a reflection of your process. Change the process, change the results. Now, here's your action step for this chapter. Before your next learning session, whatever it is, run through the 5-minute neural priming protocol. Preview the structure. Generate questions. Activate prior knowledge. Set a prediction. Declare your intention. Do this once, and you'll notice a difference. Do this consistently, and you'll never go back to learning cold. But I need to prepare you for something that might feel counterintuitive. Neural priming prepares your brain to receive information. It opens the channels, creates the scaffolding, sets up the predictions. This is the first phase of accelerated learning. But the second phase goes against everything you've been taught about memory. Because after you absorb information, the next step isn't to hold on tight. It isn't to review immediately. It isn't to drill until you've got it locked in. The next step is to let go. Strategically, intentionally, on purpose. Because forgetting, real, deliberate forgetting, isn't the enemy of memory. It's the secret to making memories permanent. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly why everything you've believed about forgetting is wrong. Chapter 3. The Forgetting Paradox. Why letting go locks it in. Everything you've been told about memory is wrong. Forgetting isn't the enemy. It's the secret weapon. I know that sounds backwards. Your entire life, you've been taught that good memory means not forgetting. You've been told that forgetting is failure. That when information slips away, something went wrong. That the goal of learning is to remember everything, forever, without gaps. But what if that belief, the belief that forgetting is bad, is the very thing preventing you from building permanent memories? What if the fastest path to never forgetting something is to forget it first? This is the paradox at the heart of accelerated learning. And once you understand it, you'll stop fighting your brain's natural memory process and start using it as the powerful tool it was designed to be. Let me take you back to 1885. A German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus conducted the first rigorous experiments on human memory. He memorized lists of nonsense syllables and tested himself at various intervals to see how much he retained over time. What he discovered became one of the most famous findings in psychology: the forgetting curve. Within 20 minutes of learning something new, you've already forgotten 40% of it. Within 24 hours, you've lost 67%. Within a month, nearly 80% is gone. For over a century, this finding has been used to argue one thing: we need to fight forgetting. We need to review constantly. We need to drill information repeatedly to prevent the inevitable decay. But here's what most people missed about Ebbinghaus's research. They focused on the forgetting. They ignored the recovery. Because Ebbinghaus also discovered something remarkable. When he relearned material he had forgotten, something strange happened. The second learning was faster than the first. The third was faster still. And each time he let himself forget and then relearned, the memory became more durable, more resistant to future forgetting. Forgetting wasn't erasing the memory. Forgetting was strengthening it. It took another 100 years for scientists to fully understand why. In the 1990s, Robert Burke at UCLA developed what he called the new theory of disuse. And it completely reframes how we should think about memory. Here's the key insight. Every memory has two strengths, not one. The first is storage strength, how deeply embedded the memory is in your brain. The second is retrieval strength, how easily you can access that memory right now. These two strengths operate independently. And here's where it gets interesting. When you first learn something, retrieval strength is high. The information is fresh, accessible, right at the surface of your mind. But storage strength is low. The memory hasn't been consolidated. It hasn't been integrated into your long-term knowledge structures. When you review immediately, while retrieval strength is still high, you feel productive. You feel like you're reinforcing the memory. But neurologically, almost nothing is happening. Your brain thinks, I already have easy access to this. No need to strengthen the storage. But when you wait, when you let retrieval strength drop, when you let yourself partially forget, something powerful happens. When you then try to retrieve that information, your brain has to work. It has to dig. It has to reconstruct. And that effort, that struggle, that difficulty, that's what builds storage strength. This is the paradox. Easy retrieval builds weak memories. Difficult retrieval builds strong memories. Forgetting creates the difficulty that makes remembering permanent. Bjork calls this principle desirable difficulty. The struggle to remember isn't a sign that learning failed. The struggle is the learning. Without the struggle, without the forgetting, Without the effort of reconstruction, memory stays shallow and temporary. Let me make this concrete with a comparison between average and elite learners. Average learners cram. They study intensively right before they need to perform, before an exam, before a presentation, before a certification test. They review material over and over in a single session until it feels familiar. And then they're shocked when, 2 weeks later, they remember almost nothing. Elite learners space. They deliberately distribute their study sessions over time. They review material, then wait. They let themselves forget. They let retrieval strength drop. And then they review again, forcing their brain to work to reconstruct the information. Each cycle of forgetting and retrieval builds deeper storage strength. Same total study time. Radically different long-term results. Research published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology compared these two approaches directly. Students who spaced their learning over 4 sessions, with gaps between each session, outperformed students who did all 4 sessions back-to-back by over 40% on tests given 1 week later. The spacing group spent the same amount of time studying. They just distributed it differently. But here's the part that surprises most people. During the learning process, the spacing group felt less confident. The cramming group felt like they knew the material better. The immediate reviews made information feel familiar, accessible, learned. This is the trap. Fluency is not the same as durability. Just because you can recall something easily right now doesn't mean you'll be able to recall it next week. The feeling of knowing is often an illusion, one that leads you to stop studying precisely when you should keep going. Elite learners have learned to distrust fluency. They know that if retrieval feels too easy, the learning isn't sticking. They deliberately create difficulty. They wait until they've partially forgotten before reviewing. They embrace the discomfort of struggling to remember because they know that struggle is building something permanent. Now let me give you the specific intervals that research suggests are optimal for spacing. The exact timing depends on how long you need to retain the information. But here's a general framework based on studies from the University of California and other institutions. For information you need to retain for 1 week, space your reviews about 1 to 2 days apart. For information you need for 1 month, space reviews about 1 week apart. For information you need for 1 year or longer, space reviews about 1 month apart. The pattern is clear. The longer you need to remember something, the longer you should wait between reviews. Short gaps build short-term retention. Long gaps build long-term retention. This is why cramming works for tomorrow's test, but fails for lasting knowledge. The spacing is too compressed. You're building retrieval strength without building storage strength. The information is accessible in the moment, but has no foundation for permanence. Now here's the protocol I want you to implement. I call it the forgetting loop, and it's designed to work with your brain's natural memory architecture instead of against it. Step 1. Initial learning. Engage with new material using the neural priming techniques from the previous chapter. Focus on understanding, not memorization. Don't try to lock everything in. Just build the initial framework. Step 2. First forgetting gap. Wait 24 hours. Do nothing related to this material. Let retrieval strength begin to drop. Let yourself start to forget. This feels wrong, but it's essential. Step 3. First retrieval session. Without looking at your notes, try to recall the key concepts. Struggle with it. Write down everything you can remember. Only after you've exhausted your recall should you review the original material to fill in gaps. The struggle is the point. Step 4. Second forgetting gap. Wait 3 to 4 days. Again, do nothing. Let retrieval strength drop further. Let the forgetting deepen. Step 5. Second retrieval session. Repeat the recall then review process. You'll notice something interesting. Even though more time has passed, you might remember more than you did after 24 hours. This is the spacing effect in action. Each retrieval is building storage strength. Step 6. Extended spacing. Continue with gaps of 1 week, then 2 weeks, then 1 month. Each successful retrieval after a longer gap locks the memory in more permanently. The total time spent reviewing is often less than you'd spend cramming. But the results are dramatically better because you're working with your brain's consolidation process instead of trying to override it. Let me give you another comparison between average and elite learners, this time focused on how they respond to forgetting. When average learners forget something, they panic. They see forgetting as evidence of failure. They think, I studied this. Why don't I remember it? Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I need to study more hours. They respond to forgetting by cramming harder, reviewing more frequently, trying to prevent any gap in their knowledge. When elite learners forget something, they're satisfied. They see forgetting as evidence that they're spacing correctly. They think, good. Retrieval strength dropped. Now when I review, I'll build real storage strength. They respond to forgetting by waiting even longer before the next review, knowing that the difficulty is creating durability. This mindset shift is crucial. You have to stop seeing forgetting as the enemy. Forgetting is not failure. Forgetting is fertilizer. It creates the conditions for stronger, more permanent memories to grow. There's one more piece to this puzzle that most people miss. The forgetting curve isn't fixed. It changes based on how you retrieve information. Passive review, rereading notes, watching videos again, looking over highlighted text, produces minimal strengthening even after a forgetting gap. You're re-exposing yourself to information, but you're not forcing retrieval. Your brain isn't working to reconstruct the memory. Active retrieval, testing yourself, writing from memory, explaining concepts without notes, solving problems, produces massive strengthening. You're forcing your brain to dig for the information, to rebuild the neural pathways, to do the work that creates durable storage. This is why flashcards work better than rereading. This is why practice tests work better than review sessions. This is why teaching someone else is one of the most powerful learning techniques, because you're forced to retrieve and reconstruct knowledge actively. The forgetting loop only works if you pair the forgetting gaps with active retrieval. Wait, then struggle to remember. Don't wait, then passively review. The struggle is what transforms forgotten information into permanent knowledge. Here's your action step for this chapter. Take the learning goal you identified in Chapter 1. Design a forgetting loop schedule for the next 30 days. Map out when you'll do your initial learning, when you'll let yourself forget, and when you'll do active retrieval sessions. Put these sessions in your calendar. Treat them as non-negotiable appointments. Your schedule might look something like this. Day 1, initial learning with neural priming. Day 2 and 3, do nothing. Day 4, active retrieval session. Day 5 through 7, do nothing. Day 8, active retrieval session. Day 15, active retrieval session. Day 30, active retrieval session. That's 6 sessions spread over a month. Less total time than you'd spend cramming. But the retention will be 3 to 4 times higher because you're leveraging the forgetting paradox instead of fighting it. Now you understand the win of accelerated learning. You know to prime before you learn. You know to space your reviews strategically. You know that forgetting isn't failure. It's the foundation of permanent memory. But there's still a critical question we haven't answered. How long should each learning session actually be? Most people assume longer is better. More hours, more learning. But neuroscience tells a completely different story. The research on attention, focus, and deep processing reveals an optimal session length that will shock most people. It's not 3 hours. It's not 2 hours. It's not even 1 hour. It's 20 minutes. And in the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how 20 minutes of focused immersion can replace hours of distracted study, and why this counterintuitive approach produces dramatically better results. Chapter 4. The 20-Minute Immersion Protocol. What if 20 focused minutes could replace 3 hours of traditional study? Neuroscience says it can. I know what you're thinking. 20 minutes? That's barely enough time to get started. That can't possibly be enough to learn anything substantial. More time has to mean more learning. But here's what the research actually shows. The relationship between study time and learning is not linear. It's not even close to linear. After a certain point, more time doesn't just fail to help, it actively hurts. Your brain isn't designed for marathon learning sessions. It's designed for short, intense bursts of focused processing followed by rest and consolidation. And when you understand how your brain's attention system actually works, you'll realize that 3 hours of distracted study produces less learning than 20 minutes of true immersion. Let me show you what's happening inside your brain when you try to learn. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for focus, working memory, and complex thinking, runs on a limited energy supply. Specifically, it runs on glucose and oxygen delivered through blood flow. When you engage in intense cognitive work, this region consumes resources at a rapid rate. Research from MIT's Department of Brain and Cognitive Sciences found that sustained attention depletes prefrontal resources in predictable cycles. After approximately 20 to 25 minutes of focused cognitive work, your brain's efficiency drops significantly. Neural firing patterns become less coordinated. Working memory capacity shrinks. The ability to form new connections, which is literally what learning is, declines by as much as 50%. This isn't weakness. This isn't lack of discipline. This is biology. Your brain has natural attention cycles, and fighting them doesn't make you a better learner. It makes you a less efficient one. But here's what most people do. They sit down to study for 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes more. They push through the fatigue. They fight the wandering attention. They mistake time spent for learning accomplished. And at the end, they've retained a fraction of what they would have learned in shorter, more focused sessions. The average learner measures learning by hours logged. The elite learner measures learning by depth achieved. This distinction changes everything. Let me give you a concrete comparison. Imagine two people trying to learn financial modeling. Person A blocks out 3 hours on Saturday afternoon. They open their laptop, start a tutorial, and grind through it. By hour 2, they're checking their phone between lessons. By hour 3, they're rewatching sections because nothing is sticking. They finish feeling exhausted and vaguely familiar with the material. Person B takes a different approach. They do 3 20-minute sessions spread across 3 days. Each session, they eliminate all distractions. They engage with complete focus. They stop before fatigue sets in. They let their brain rest and consolidate between sessions. Person B spent 1 hour total compared to Person A's 3 hours. But 1 week later, Person B retains nearly 3 times as much information. Not because they're smarter, because they worked with their brain's natural cycles instead of against them. This is the core principle of the 20-minute immersion protocol. Quality of attention beats quantity of time. Every single time. Now let me break down exactly how to structure these 20 minutes for maximum impact. The protocol has 4 phases. Each phase serves a specific neurological purpose. Skip any phase, and you compromise the entire session. Phase 1 is the transition phase. This takes approximately 2 minutes. The goal is to shift your brain from whatever you were doing before into a focused learning state. Your brain can't switch instantly. There's always cognitive residue from your previous activity. The transition phase clears that residue. Here's what you do. Close all unnecessary applications and browser tabs. Put your phone in another room or in a drawer, not just face down, but physically removed from your environment. Take 3 deep breaths to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. Then verbally state what you're about to learn and why it matters. This verbal declaration activates your reticular activating system, which filters attention toward relevant information. 2 minutes of transition can double the effectiveness of the 18 minutes that follow. Most people skip this entirely. They jump straight into content while their brain is still processing the email they just read or the conversation they just had. That's like trying to record on a tape that's still playing something else. Phase 2 is the acquisition phase. This takes approximately 10 minutes. This is your primary learning window, the period of peak cognitive efficiency. Your brain is primed, focused, and ready to form new connections. During this phase, you engage with new material actively, not passively watching or reading, but questioning, connecting, and processing. If you're watching a video, pause every few minutes to summarize what you just learned. If you're reading, stop after each section to explain the concept in your own words. If you're practicing a skill, focus on one specific element rather than trying to improve everything at once. The key is active engagement. Your brain doesn't learn from exposure. It learns from processing. 10 minutes of active processing creates more neural connections than 60 minutes of passive consumption. Phase 3 is the consolidation phase. This takes approximately 5 minutes. This is where most people make a critical mistake. They finish the acquisition phase and immediately move on to something else, checking email, scrolling social media, starting another task. This context switch interrupts consolidation and can erase up to 40% of what you just learned. During the consolidation phase, you do low stimulation reflection. Close your eyes or look at a blank wall. Mentally review what you just learned. Try to recall the key concepts without looking at any material. Let your mind wander around the topic, making connections to things you already know. This might feel unproductive. You're not consuming new information. You're not doing anything visible. But neurologically, this is when memories are being transferred from working memory to long-term storage. Skip this phase, and you're essentially deleting your work. Phase 4 is the documentation phase. This takes approximately 3 minutes. Before you leave the session, capture the most important insights in writing. Not detailed notes, just the essential takeaways. 2 to 3 bullet points maximum. This serves two purposes. First, the act of writing reinforces memory through a different neural pathway. Second, these notes become retrieval cues for your future forgetting loop sessions. When you come back to review days later, these brief notes will help trigger the full memory reconstruction process. That's the complete protocol. 2 minutes transition, 10 minutes acquisition, 5 minutes consolidation, 3 minutes documentation. 20 minutes total. Now let me address the obvious question. What if you have more than 20 minutes of material to cover? The answer is not to extend the session. The answer is to do multiple sessions with breaks between them. Your brain needs recovery time between focused learning efforts. Research on ultradian rhythms, the natural cycles of energy and alertness in your body, suggests that 90 to 120 minutes of rest between intense cognitive sessions allows for full prefrontal recovery. So if you have 2 hours of material to learn, don't do it in one 2-hour block. Do 6 20-minute sessions spread across 2 or 3 days. You'll spend the same amount of time engaged with the material, but you'll retain dramatically more. Here's another comparison between average and elite learners that illustrates this point. Average learners believe that struggle and fatigue are signs of productive learning. They think, this is hard, so I must be growing. They push through mental exhaustion, viewing it as a badge of honor. They'd rather do one painful 3-hour session than 3 easy 20-minute sessions because the pain feels like progress. Elite learners know that struggle during retrieval is productive, but struggle due to fatigue is counterproductive. There's a difference between the difficulty of reconstructing a memory, which builds strength, and the difficulty of focusing when your prefrontal cortex is depleted, which just wastes time. Elite learners stop before fatigue compromises their learning. They know that rest is part of the process, not an interruption to it. This mindset shift is essential. Productive learning shouldn't feel like suffering. If you're exhausted, frustrated, and forcing yourself to continue, you're not being disciplined, you're being inefficient. The goal is depth of processing, not duration of effort. Let me give you a real-world example of this protocol in action. Sarah was a product manager trying to learn SQL for data analysis. Her initial approach was typical. She'd block out 2 to 3 hours on weekends, work through online tutorials, and end each session feeling mentally drained. After a month, she could follow along with examples, but couldn't write queries independently. The knowledge wasn't transferring. She switched to the 20-minute Immersion Protocol. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, before checking email, she did one focus session. 2 minutes to transition and set intention. 10 minutes working through one specific SQL concept with active practice. 5 minutes with eyes closed, mentally reviewing what she'd learned. 3 minutes writing down the key syntax and one example use case. Same weekly time investment, 60 minutes per week instead of her previous 2 to 3 hours on the weekend. But within 3 weeks, she was writing basic queries from memory. Within 6 weeks, she was building reports her team actually used. The difference wasn't talent or intelligence. The difference was matching her learning approach to how her brain actually works. Here's your action step for this chapter. Create your 20-minute Immersion Protocol checklist. Write down the 4 phases with their time allocations. Identify when in your day you can do focused 20-minute sessions. ideally when your natural energy is highest, which for most people is mid-morning. Remove friction by preparing your environment in advance. Know what you'll study, have materials ready, and have a distraction-free space identified. Then do your first session within the next 24 hours. Not next week. Not when you have time. Tomorrow morning. Experience the difference between 20 minutes of immersion and an hour of distracted study. Once you feel the contrast, you'll never go back to marathon sessions. Now, you have the when and the how long of accelerated learning. You know to prime your brain before you start. You know to space your sessions with strategic forgetting. You know to keep sessions short and focused for maximum depth. But there's another accelerator that most people completely overlook. It's the difference between seeing information as isolated facts and seeing information as connected patterns. It's the reason experts can look at complex problems and immediately see solutions that novices miss entirely. Your brain has a built-in pattern recognition engine. It's extraordinarily powerful. Chess masters use it to evaluate positions in seconds. Doctors use it to diagnose conditions from subtle symptom combinations. Elite performers in every field use it to learn faster and perform better. The problem is, most people never learn how to activate it. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how pattern recognition works, why it's the key to intuitive expertise, and how to deliberately trigger it so you can learn complex skills in a fraction of the normal time. Chapter 5. Activating your pattern recognition engine. Your brain has a supercomputer for learning. It's called pattern recognition, and you've been leaving it turned off. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is performing millions of pattern-matching operations. It's recognizing the sounds of language and converting them to meaning. It's connecting what you're hearing to concepts you already know. It's predicting what's coming next based on patterns it's learned from every conversation you've ever had. This pattern recognition system is the most powerful learning tool you possess. It's what allows a chess master to glance at a board and instantly know the best move. It's what allows a doctor to see a patient for 30 seconds and suspect a diagnosis that takes others hours to reach. It's what separates true expertise from mere familiarity. And here's the remarkable thing. You already have this system. It's built into your neural architecture. But unless you know how to deliberately activate it, you'll spend years learning what could take months. Because you're processing information one piece at a time instead of seeing the underlying structures that connect everything together. Let me show you exactly how pattern recognition works and how to turn it on. In the 1960s, a Dutch psychologist named Adriaan de Groot conducted a famous experiment with chess players. He showed chess positions to players of various skill levels for just 5 seconds, then asked them to reconstruct the positions from memory. The results were striking. Grandmasters could recall the positions with nearly perfect accuracy. Novice players could barely remember where a few pieces were located. The obvious conclusion seemed to be that grandmasters simply had better memories. But then de Groot added a twist. He showed both groups random chess positions, pieces placed on the board with no logical pattern, positions that could never occur in a real game. Suddenly, the grandmaster advantage disappeared. Their recall of random positions was no better than the novices. Their supposedly superior memory had vanished. What this experiment revealed was profound. Grandmasters don't have better memories. They have better pattern recognition. When they look at a real chess position, they don't see individual pieces. They see chunks, familiar configurations they've encountered thousands of times before. A cluster of pawns becomes one unit. A standard attack formation becomes another unit. Instead of remembering 25 individual piece locations, they're remembering 5 or 6 meaningful patterns. But when the position is random, there are no patterns to recognize. The grandmasters have to process each piece individually, just like the novices. And without pattern recognition, their advantage disappears. This finding has been replicated across virtually every domain of expertise. Radiologists looking at X-rays, programmers reading code, musicians sight reading scores. In every case, the experts aren't processing more information, they're processing information differently. They've developed pattern libraries that allow them to see meaningful structures where novices see only noise. This is the secret to accelerated learning. When you develop pattern recognition in any domain, you stop learning facts and start learning structures. And structures transfer. They generalize. They allow you to understand new situations instantly because you recognize them as variations of patterns you already know. The average learner approaches new material as a collection of separate facts to memorize. They see each piece of information as independent, unconnected, requiring its own mental space. Their working memory fills up quickly because they're trying to hold too many individual items. The elite learner approaches new material as a system of interconnected patterns. They look for structures, relationships, and organizing principles. They ask, what is this similar to? What pattern does this fit? How does this connect to what I already know? Their working memory stays clear because they're storing patterns, not pieces. This difference in approach explains why some people can learn a new programming language in weeks, while others struggle for months. The fast learners aren't memorizing syntax. They're recognizing patterns that transfer from languages they already know. They see that loops work similarly across languages. That conditional logic follows predictable structures. That data types share common categories. Each new language becomes easier because their pattern library grows with each one. So how do you deliberately activate pattern recognition when learning something new? The first technique is called chunking. This is the process of grouping individual pieces of information into meaningful units. Your working memory can only hold about 4 items at a time. This is a hard neurological limit. But a chunk counts as one item, regardless of how much information it contains. Consider how you learned to read. At first, each letter was a separate item. CAT required 3 working memory slots. But once you chunked those letters into the word cat, it became 1 slot. Then you chunked words into phrases, phrases into sentences. Now you can process entire paragraphs as single units of meaning. This is chunking in action, and you can deliberately apply it to anything you're learning. When you encounter new material, actively look for elements that naturally group together. In accounting, don't try to memorize individual rules. Chunk them into categories like asset accounts, liability accounts, and equity accounts. In programming, don't memorize individual functions. Chunk them into patterns like iteration, selection, and recursion. In sales, don't memorize individual objections. Chunk them into categories like price concerns, timing concerns, and trust concerns. Every chunk you create frees up working memory for more learning. Every chunk becomes a single node that can connect to other chunks, building an increasingly sophisticated mental model. The second technique is schema building. A schema is a mental framework that organizes related patterns into a coherent structure. If chunks are the building blocks, schemas are the architecture. Here's an example. When you first learn about business, you might encounter hundreds of separate concepts: revenue, expenses, profit margins, customer acquisition, retention rates, market share, competitive advantage. Individually, these are overwhelming. But when you build a schema, a mental model of how businesses actually work, they all find their place. You realize that revenue minus expenses equals profit. That customer acquisition and retention both drive revenue. That competitive advantage enables both higher prices and better retention. That market share reflects your position relative to competitors. Suddenly, the concepts aren't separate facts. They're components of a system. And once you see the system, you can reason about new business situations without having memorized anything specific to them. Elite learners are constantly building schemas. They ask questions like, what's the overall structure here? How do these pieces fit together? What's the organizing principle? They don't just collect information. They organize it into coherent mental models. The third technique is the first principles plus patterns approach. This is the most powerful pattern recognition accelerator, and it works by combining 2 complementary processes. First principles thinking means breaking a domain down to its fundamental truths, the basic building blocks that everything else is built from. What are the core concepts that can't be reduced further? What are the foundational rules that govern this domain? Pattern recognition then allows you to see how those first principles combine in different situations. Once you know the fundamental elements, you can recognize how they appear in various configurations. Let me illustrate with an example. Suppose you're learning negotiation. The first principles approach would identify fundamental truths like both parties need to feel they're gaining value. Alternatives determine bargaining power. Relationships affect willingness to compromise. Information asymmetry creates advantage. With these principles clear, pattern recognition becomes powerful. You start seeing every negotiation situation as a combination of these elements. A salary negotiation is really about alternatives and information. A vendor contract is really about relationship and relative power. A conflict resolution is really about making both parties feel they've gained value. You stop memorizing negotiation techniques and start seeing underlying structures. And those structures transfer to situations you've never encountered before. Here's another comparison between average and elite learners that shows this in practice. When average learners encounter something confusing, they slow down and try to memorize harder. They think the problem is insufficient exposure or effort. They reread. They make more flashcards. They try to force the information into memory through repetition. When elite learners encounter something confusing, they zoom out and look for patterns. They think the problem is insufficient structure. They ask, what's the bigger picture here? What am I missing that would make this make sense? How does this connect to something I already understand? They don't try to memorize confusion. They try to resolve it through pattern recognition. This difference explains why some people hit learning plateaus and others break through them. When you're stuck, more repetition of the same approach rarely helps. What helps is finding the pattern that makes everything click into place. Carnegie Mellon researchers studying cognitive load found that presenting information in pattern-organized structures reduced mental effort by up to 60% while improving retention. When information is organized around recognizable patterns, your brain processes it more efficiently. When information is presented as disconnected facts, your brain struggles to find a place to put it. This is why the best teachers don't just transfer information, they transfer structure. They show you how things fit together. They give you the patterns that make everything else make sense. And once you have those patterns, you can learn independently at an accelerated rate. Here's your action step for this chapter. Take your 30-day learning goal and do a pattern mapping exercise. Get a blank piece of paper. In the center, write the main skill or subject you're learning. Now, spend 15 minutes identifying patterns. First, identify the chunks. What are the natural groupings within this domain? What pieces of information belong together as units? Second, sketch the schema. How do these chunks relate to each other? What's the organizing structure? Draw lines connecting related chunks. Label the relationships. Third, identify first principles. What are the 3 to 5 fundamental truths that everything else builds from? Write these at the bottom of your page as the foundation. This exercise might feel difficult. You might not know enough yet to see all the patterns. That's fine. The goal isn't perfection, it's activation. By looking for patterns from the very beginning, you're training your brain to process information structurally instead of sequentially. As you learn more, return to this map. Add new chunks. Refine the schema. Identify principles you missed. Watch as isolated facts find their place within an increasingly coherent structure. Pattern recognition transforms how you learn. But there's a technique that makes pattern recognition even more powerful, one that seems counterintuitive but has been proven to double retention while cutting study time in half. It's called interleaving, and it works by deliberately mixing different types of problems, different topics, and different skills within the same study session. The conventional approach says to master one thing before moving to the next. The research says the opposite produces far better results. In the next chapter, I'll show you exactly how interleaving works, why it feels harder but produces better outcomes, and how to implement it in your own learning practice. Chapter 6. The Interleaving Method. Double retention, half the time. A UCLA study found one technique that doubles retention. 92% of learners have never heard of it. The technique is called interleaving, and it violates everything you've been taught about how to practice, how to study, and how to master new skills. You were taught to focus on one thing at a time. Master Chapter 1 before moving to Chapter 2. Practice one type of problem until you get it right, then move to the next type. Perfect one skill before adding another. This approach is called block practice, and it feels like the right way to learn. It feels organized. It feels logical. It feels like progress. But feelings lie. And when researchers actually measured learning outcomes, they discovered something that shocked the educational world. Blocked practice produces faster initial performance, but dramatically worse long-term retention. Interleaved practice, deliberately mixing different topics, problem types, and skills within the same session, feels slower and harder, but produces retention rates that are often double those of blocked practice. Double. The same time investment, the same material, just a different sequence, and twice the results. Let me walk you through the research that proved this. In 2007, Doug Rohrer and Kelly Taylor at the University of South Florida conducted an elegant experiment. They taught students to calculate the volumes of 4 different geometric shapes: wedges, spheroids, spherical cones, and half cones. Half the students learned using blocked practice, all the wedge problems together, then all the spheroid problems, then all the spherical cone problems, then all the half cone problems. The other half learned using interleaved practice. The problem types were mixed randomly throughout the session. During the learning phase, the blocked group performed better. They got more answers right. They moved faster. They reported feeling more confident. By every immediate measure, blocked practice appeared superior. Then came the test. 1 week later, both groups were given new problems of all 4 types. The results weren't even close. The interleaved group outperformed the blocked group by an extraordinary margin, 72% accuracy versus 38%. The group that felt like they were learning less had actually learned nearly twice as much. This finding has been replicated hundreds of times across different domains. Baseball players who practice hitting fastballs, curveballs, and changeups in mixed sequence develop better batting skills than those who practice each pitch type in separate blocks. Medical students who study different diseases in interleaved fashion make more accurate diagnoses than those who study one disease at a time. Musicians who practice different pieces in rotation develop stronger sight-reading skills than those who master one piece before starting another. The pattern is consistent. Blocked practice creates the illusion of learning. Interleaved practice creates actual learning. So why does interleaving work? And why does it feel harder even though it's more effective? The answer goes back to what we discussed in the previous chapter about pattern recognition. When you practice in blocks, your brain doesn't have to work very hard to identify what kind of problem you're facing. If you just did 10 wedge problems in a row, you already know the next one is a wedge problem. You don't have to recognize anything. You just have to execute. But in real life, problems don't come labeled. No one tells you, this is a wedge problem. Use the wedge formula. You have to look at a situation and figure out what type of problem it is before you can solve it. This is called discrimination, the ability to distinguish between different problem types and select the appropriate strategy. Blocked practice never develops discrimination. You're practicing execution without practicing recognition. Then when you encounter mixed problems in the real world or on a test, you can't identify what you're looking at because you never had to during practice. Interleaved practice forces discrimination from the very beginning. Every problem, you have to ask, what type is this? What strategy applies here? How is this different from the last one? This additional cognitive step is exactly what makes interleaving feel harder, but it's also what makes the learning stick. Here's a comparison that illustrates this principle. The average learner structures practice for immediate performance. They want to feel successful during the session. They want to see correct answers. They want the dopamine hit of getting things right. So they organize their practice to maximize that feeling, which means block practice, which means minimal discrimination challenge, which means poor long-term retention. The elite learner structures practice for long-term transfer. They know that struggle during practice is the price of success during performance. They deliberately make practice harder, mixing problem types, varying conditions, forcing discrimination, because they understand that the difficulty is building durable skills. They'd rather feel confused during practice and confident during performance than the reverse. This mindset shift is crucial. You have to stop optimizing for how practice feels and start optimizing for what practice produces. Now let me give you the specific implementation framework for interleaving. The first principle is to mix problem types within a single session. If you're learning math, don't do all the addition problems, then all the subtraction problems, then all the multiplication problems. Mix them. Do an addition problem, then a multiplication problem, then a subtraction problem. Force your brain to identify the operation required before executing it. If you're learning a language, don't practice all the past tense verbs, then all the present tense, then all the future tense. Mix the tenses within the same practice session. Force yourself to identify which tense is needed based on context, just like you'd have to in real conversation. If you're learning a professional skill like data analysis, don't practice all the filtering techniques, then all the pivot table techniques, then all the visualization techniques. Mix them. Present yourself with different data questions that require different approaches. Develop the ability to look at a problem and immediately recognize what tool it needs. The second principle is to space your interleaving across multiple sessions. Interleaving works best when combined with the spacing effect we discussed in Chapter 3. Don't just mix problem types within one session. Return to each type across multiple sessions over days and weeks. This creates a double benefit. Within each session, interleaving forces discrimination. Across sessions, spacing forces retrieval from long-term memory. The combination produces retention rates that neither technique achieves alone. Here's a practical weekly schedule template for interleaved learning. Let's say you're trying to master 3 related skills. We'll call them Skill A, Skill B, and Skill C. The blocked approach would have you focus entirely on Skill A during week 1, Skill B during week 2, and Skill C during week 3. The interleaved approach looks different. During week 1, you practice all 3 skills, but weight towards Skill A, perhaps 50% A, 30% B, 20% C. During week 2, you shift the weighting 30% A, 50% B, 20% C. During week 3, you shift again 20% A, 30% B, 50% C. By the end of 3 weeks, you've spent the same total time on each skill, but you've practiced each skill in multiple sessions across multiple weeks. You've forced discrimination by mixing skills within sessions, and you've built connections between the skills because you're practicing them in proximity. This approach feels messy. It feels less organized. It feels like you're not making progress on any single skill. But the research is unambiguous. It produces dramatically better outcomes. The third principle is to embrace the feeling of difficulty. This is perhaps the most important implementation point. Interleaving will feel frustrating. You'll make more errors during practice. You'll feel less confident. You'll be tempted to return to block practice because it feels more productive. Resist that temptation. The difficulty is the signal that learning is happening. When practice feels easy, your brain isn't being challenged to discriminate, to retrieve, to build durable skills. Easy practice is wasted practice. Research from the Journal of Educational Psychology found that students consistently rated interleaved practice as less effective than blocked practice, even when their test scores showed the opposite. Our intuitions about what helps us learn are systematically wrong. This is why you can't trust how learning feels. You have to trust the process. Here's another comparison between average and elite learners. When average learners design a study schedule, they organize by topic. Monday is finance, Tuesday is marketing, Wednesday is operations. Each day focuses on one domain. This feels organized and efficient. It's also suboptimal for retention because there's no interleaving and no discrimination development. When elite learners design a study schedule, they organize by session structure, not topic. Every study session includes elements from multiple domains. Monday's session might include finance, marketing, and operations problems mixed together. So might Tuesdays and Wednesdays. The schedule looks less clean, but the learning runs deeper. The difference compounds over time. After 3 months, the blocked learner has cycled through each topic once in isolation. The interleaved learner has returned to each topic dozens of times, in combination with other topics, building connections and discrimination ability that the blocked learner never developed. Let me give you a concrete example of how to convert a blocked study plan to an interleaved one. Suppose you're preparing for a professional certification exam with 5 major topic areas. The blocked approach would allocate week 1 to topic 1, week 2 to topic 2, and so on. 5 weeks of focused study, one topic at a time. The interleaved approach restructures this completely. Each week, you study all 5 topics, but with varying emphasis. Week 1 might weight topic 1 at 40% and topics 2 through 5 at 15% each. Week 2 shifts the weight to topic 2, and so on. Within each study session, you mix problem types from different topics. If you have 60 minutes, you might spend 15 minutes on each of 4 different topics rather than 60 minutes on one topic. You finish each session having practiced discrimination across multiple domains. Same total time, same material covered, radically different retention and transfer. Here's your action step for this chapter. Take your current study plan for your 30-day learning goal and convert it to an interleave format. If you've been organizing by topic or skill, reorganize by session structure. Create study sessions that mix multiple elements rather than focusing on one element at a time. Write out your next week of study sessions. For each session, list at least 3 different problem types, skills, or subtopics you'll practice. Decide in advance that you'll mix them rather than blocking them. And commit to continuing even when it feels harder and less productive, because that difficulty is the learning. Now you have the complete technical toolkit for accelerated learning. You know how to prime your brain before studying. You know how to space your reviews for maximum retention. You know how to structure focused 20-minute sessions. You know how to activate pattern recognition. And you know how to interleave for better discrimination and transfer. These techniques work. The research is overwhelming. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Knowing the techniques isn't enough. Having the right method isn't enough. Because between you and consistent implementation stands a barrier that defeats most people. That barrier isn't knowledge. It's not even time. The barrier is the belief that you need motivation to learn. You've probably experienced this. You learn about a new technique, get excited, apply it for a few days, and then life happens. Your motivation fades. Your enthusiasm drops. You skip a session, then another, then another. Before long, you've abandoned the approach entirely, not because it didn't work, but because you didn't feel like doing it. This is the motivation trap, and it defeats more learners than any other obstacle. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you why motivation is irrelevant to consistent learning, what actually drives long-term behavior change, and how to build a system that makes learning automatic, regardless of how you feel on any given day. Chapter 7. Why motivation is irrelevant and what actually works. Stop chasing motivation. The fastest learners don't rely on it. They've replaced it with something better. If you've ever started a learning project with excitement only to abandon it 3 weeks later, you know the motivation trap. Day 1, you're fired up. You create a study schedule. You buy the books. You tell your friends about your goal. The energy feels unstoppable. Day 7, the energy has faded. The excitement has worn off. Other priorities crowd in. You skip one session because you're tired, then another because you're busy. Then you stop thinking about it altogether. The books gather dust. The schedule gets forgotten. And you add another item to the list of things you started but never finished. This pattern isn't a character flaw. It's not evidence that you lack discipline or willpower. It's the predictable result of building a learning practice on motivation. And motivation is the worst possible foundation. Here's why. Motivation is an emotion, and emotions, by their nature, fluctuate. They rise and fall based on sleep, stress, blood sugar, weather, relationships, and 1,000 other variables you can't control. Building consistent behavior on an inconsistent foundation guarantees inconsistent results. Yet this is exactly what most people do. They wait until they feel motivated to study. They rely on excitement to carry them through difficult material. They assume that wanting to learn is enough to make learning happen. Elite learners have discovered a different approach. They don't rely on motivation at all. They've built systems, environmental triggers, automatic routines, identity shifts that make learning happen regardless of how they feel on any given day. The difference between average and elite learners isn't willpower. It's architecture. Let me show you how this works. In 2007, B.J. Fogg at Stanford's Behavior Design Lab began researching why people fail to follow through on behaviors they genuinely want to adopt. His conclusion, after years of study, was counterintuitive. The problem isn't motivation. The problem is design. Fogg's research showed that behavior happens when three elements converge at the same moment: motivation, ability, and a prompt. Remove any one of these, and the behavior doesn't occur. But here's the crucial insight. Motivation is the least reliable of the three. It fluctuates constantly. Ability and prompts, however, can be engineered. This means that instead of trying to increase motivation, which is unreliable and exhausting, you should focus on increasing ability and strengthening prompts. Make the behavior easier to do. Make the trigger impossible to miss. When you get those two elements right, motivation becomes almost irrelevant. Let me give you a concrete example. Suppose your goal is to study for 30 minutes every morning. The motivation-dependent approach is to wake up and decide whether you feel like studying. Some mornings you will. Most mornings you won't. Your results will be inconsistent at best. The system-dependent approach removes the decision entirely. You design your environment and routine so that studying happens automatically. You put your study materials on your desk the night before, open to where you left off. You set your coffee maker to brew at 6:45 so the smell wakes you up. You create a rule: no phone until after the study session is complete. You attach studying to an existing habit. Right after brushing your teeth, you sit down at your desk. Now there's no decision to make. There's no motivation required. The environment prompts you. The routine carries you. The behavior happens because you've designed it to happen. This is what systems thinking looks like in practice. You stop relying on the feeling of wanting to learn and start engineering the conditions that make learning automatic. Here's the key distinction between average and elite learners when it comes to consistency. Average learners treat learning as an event, something they do when conditions are right, when they have enough time, when they feel prepared, when motivation strikes. Learning is an activity that competes with other activities, and it often loses. Elite learners treat learning as an identity, not something they do, but something they are. They don't decide each day whether to study. That would be like deciding each day whether to brush their teeth. The behavior is simply part of who they are. Skipping it would feel wrong, like a violation of their self-concept. This identity shift is more powerful than any technique. When you see yourself as someone who learns every day, the question isn't whether to study today, it's how. The motivation question becomes irrelevant because motivation isn't required when behavior aligns with identity. Research from the European Journal of Social Psychology found that identity-based habits are significantly more durable than goal-based habits. People who said, "I am a reader," read more consistently than people who said, "I want to read more." People who said, "I am a learner," studied more consistently than people who said, "I want to learn this skill." The language seems subtle, but the psychological difference is profound. So how do you build systems that make learning automatic? Let me give you the three-part framework. Part 1 is trigger design. Every automatic behavior needs a trigger, something that prompts the action without requiring a decision. The most effective triggers are what Fogg calls anchor habits, existing behaviors you already do consistently that can serve as launch points for new behaviors. You already brush your teeth every morning. You already make coffee. You already sit down at your desk when you start work. You already eat lunch. These are anchor habits, reliable behaviors that happen without motivation. The technique is to attach your learning behavior to an existing anchor. The formula is simple. After I do X, I will do Y. After I pour my morning coffee, I will open my study materials. After I sit down at my desk, I will review my flashcards for 5 minutes. After I eat lunch, I will watch one lesson from my course. The anchor provides the prompt. You're not relying on motivation to remember to study. You're using an existing behavior to trigger the new one. Part 2 is friction reduction. Friction is anything that makes a behavior harder to do. Extra steps, required decisions, missing materials, inconvenient timing. Every point of friction reduces the probability that the behavior will happen, especially when motivation is low. Elite learners ruthlessly eliminate friction from their learning practice. They prepare materials the night before, so there's nothing to gather in the morning. They use the same location every time, so there's no decision about where to study. They block websites and put their phone in another room, so there's no temptation to manage. Here's a friction audit you can do right now. Think about your current learning routine. Walk through every step mentally. Where are the friction points? What requires a decision? What requires effort? What creates delay between the trigger and the behavior? Every friction point is an opportunity. Remove it, and the behavior becomes easier. Make the behavior easy enough, and it happens even when motivation is zero. The opposite principle also applies. You can add friction to competing behaviors. If you want to reduce phone distractions, don't just rely on willpower. Add friction. Put your phone in a different room. Use app blockers that require a 24-hour waiting period to disable. Make the competing behavior harder, and it loses to the behavior you've made easier. Part 3 is environment design. Your environment shapes your behavior far more than your intentions do. The spaces you inhabit contain cues that trigger certain actions and suppress others. Most people design their environment for comfort or aesthetics. Elite learners design their environment for behavior. Consider your current learning environment. What does it prompt? If you study at the same desk where you browse social media, play games, and watch videos, that space has mixed associations. Your brain doesn't know which behavior to activate when you sit down. The environment is working against you. Now consider a redesigned environment. A specific chair or location that you only use for learning. Study materials visible and accessible. Distractions removed or hidden. Visual cues that remind you of your learning identity. Maybe a small sign with your goal or books displayed prominently. When you sit in that space, your brain knows exactly what behavior is expected. The environment does the work that motivation used to do. Stanford researchers found that people who designated a specific location for a specific behavior were 2 to 3 times more likely to follow through than people who didn't. Same intention, same goals, different environmental design, dramatically different results. Here's another comparison between average and elite learners, this time focused on how they respond to the days when motivation is completely absent. When average learners don't feel like studying, they negotiate with themselves. They think, I'll do it later. I'll do double tomorrow. I'll make it up this weekend. They treat low motivation as a valid reason to skip the behavior. And because low motivation is frequent, skipping becomes frequent. When elite learners don't feel like studying, they default to their minimum viable session. They think, I don't need to feel motivated. I just need to show up. They've predefined a reduced version of their practice. Maybe just 5 minutes, maybe just reviewing one concept, that they do regardless of how they feel. The goal isn't productivity. The goal is maintaining the habit. This minimum viable session is crucial. Research on habit formation shows that consistency matters more than intensity. Doing 5 minutes when you don't feel like it is more valuable for long-term habit building than doing 2 hours when you're highly motivated. The 5-minute session reinforces the identity. It keeps the streak alive. It proves to yourself that you're someone who learns even when it's hard. Never negotiate with motivation. Have a predetermined minimum that you do no matter what. Make it small enough that there's no valid excuse. Then do it, especially on the days you don't want to. Let me give you the 2-minute trigger rule. This is a technique adapted from Fogg's research that makes starting almost frictionless. Your initial trigger behavior should take 2 minutes or less. Not your whole study session, just the trigger. The trigger for studying might be opening your laptop and loading your study materials. That takes 2 minutes. The trigger for reviewing flashcards might be opening the app and doing one card. That takes 30 seconds. The psychology is simple. Big commitments are easy to avoid. Small commitments are hard to refuse. When you tell yourself, I need to study for an hour, resistance is high. When you tell yourself, I just need to open my materials, resistance drops dramatically. And here's what happens in practice. Once you've done the 2-minute trigger, you're already engaged. Starting is the hardest part. Once you've started, continuing is easier. The 2-minute commitment becomes 10 minutes, becomes 30 minutes. Not because you planned it, but because momentum carried you. The trigger gets you in motion. Motion creates momentum. Momentum eliminates the need for motivation. Here's your action step for this chapter. Design your learning system using the three-part framework. First, identify your trigger. What existing habit will you attach your learning to? Write it down as an after I do X, I will do Y statement. Second, conduct a friction audit. Identify every friction point in your current learning routine and design a solution for each one. Third, design your environment. Choose or create a specific space for learning and modify it to prompt the behavior you want. Then define your minimum viable session. What is the smallest version of your learning practice that you can commit to doing every single day, regardless of motivation? Make it small enough that no excuse is valid. Write it down. Commit to it. You now have a system that doesn't depend on motivation. A system that runs on triggers, friction reduction, and environmental design. A system that makes learning automatic. But there's one more accelerator that most people completely ignore. It requires zero effort during your waking hours because it works while you sleep. Your brain doesn't stop learning when you close your eyes. In fact, some of the most critical memory consolidation happens during specific sleep phases. And if you're not optimizing your sleep architecture for learning, you're leaving significant gains on the table. In the next chapter, I'll show you exactly how sleep consolidates memory, which sleep phases matter most for different types of learning, and how to design a pre-sleep routine that dramatically increases retention, all while you rest. Chapter 8. Sleep Architecture. Learning while you rest. The most powerful learning session happens when you're unconscious. Here's how to optimize it. Every technique we've covered so far happens while you're awake. Neural priming, spaced repetition, the 20-minute Immersion Protocol, pattern recognition, interleaving, systems over motivation. All of these require conscious effort during your waking hours. But there's a learning accelerator that requires zero conscious effort. It happens automatically every night while you sleep. And if you're not optimizing for it, you're losing up to 40% of what you learn each day, not because you forgot during waking hours, but because your brain never had the chance to properly consolidate. Sleep is not downtime. Sleep is not the absence of productivity. Sleep is when your brain does its most critical learning work. And once you understand how this works, you'll stop seeing sleep as time away from learning and start seeing it as the final, essential phase of every learning session. Let me show you what's actually happening inside your brain while you sleep. In 2017, Matthew Walker, director of the Center for Human Sleep Science at UC Berkeley, published research that transformed our understanding of sleep and memory. His work, along with decades of studies from Harvard Medical School and other institutions, revealed that sleep isn't a passive state. It's an active neurological process with specific phases that serve specific learning functions. When you sleep, your brain cycles through distinct stages. Light sleep, deep sleep, also called slow-wave sleep, and REM sleep, the phase associated with dreaming. Each cycle takes about 90 minutes, and you go through 4 to 6 cycles per night. Here's what the research revealed. Each sleep stage consolidates different types of learning. Deep slow-wave sleep, which dominates the first half of the night, is critical for declarative memory, facts, concepts, information you can consciously recall. During this phase, your brain replays the day's learning experiences at high speed, transferring information from the hippocampus, where short-term memories are held, to the neocortex, where long-term memories are stored. Studies using brain imaging have shown that the same neural patterns that fired during learning reactivate during slow-wave sleep, but compressed, sometimes running 10 to 20 times faster than the original experience. This replay isn't random. Your brain prioritizes information that was emotionally significant, information that connected to existing knowledge, and information that you actively struggled to retrieve. Sound familiar? The techniques you've learned in previous chapters, pattern recognition, active retrieval, strategic forgetting, all prime your brain to prioritize that information during sleep consolidation. REM sleep, which dominates the second half of the night, serves a different function. REM is critical for procedural memory, skills, patterns, motor learning, creative connections. During REM, your brain integrates new learning with existing knowledge structures, finds unexpected connections, and refines motor sequences. This is why musicians often play better after sleeping on a difficult passage. This is why programmers sometimes wake up with solutions to problems they couldn't solve the night before. REM sleep does integration work that conscious effort cannot replicate. Here's the crucial implication. If you cut your sleep short, if you get 6 hours instead of 8, you're not losing 25% of your sleep. You're losing a disproportionate amount of REM sleep because REM phases get longer toward morning. A person who sleeps 6 hours might get only half the REM sleep of someone who sleeps 8 hours. And that means losing half the integration, creative connection, and skill consolidation that REM provides. This is why cramming all night before an exam is neurological sabotage. You might maintain enough information in working memory to pass the test, but you've prevented the consolidation that would make that information permanent. You've traded long-term learning for short-term performance. And within days, most of what you crammed has vanished. Now let me show you the difference between how average and elite learners approach sleep. Average learners see sleep as competing with learning. They think, if I sleep less, I have more hours to study. Sleep is time I'm not being productive. They sacrifice sleep when deadlines approach. They feel virtuous about late nights spent working. They treat exhaustion as evidence of effort. Elite learners see sleep as part of learning. They think, if I don't sleep enough, today's study session won't consolidate. Sleep is when the learning actually locks in. They protect sleep when deadlines approach because they know tired learning is inefficient learning. They feel strategic about maintaining sleep even during intense periods. They treat rest as a non-negotiable phase of the learning process. This reframe changes behavior. When you understand that sleep deprivation doesn't just make you tired, it actively erases what you learned the previous day, you stop sacrificing sleep for extra study hours. Those extra hours are worse than worthless. They're counterproductive. Research from Harvard Medical School demonstrated this dramatically. Subjects who learned a visual discrimination task improved by 40% after a night of sleep. Subjects who were sleep-deprived showed no improvement at all, despite having the same learning experience. The learning happened during the day. The improvement happened during sleep. Without sleep, there was no improvement. But here's where it gets even more interesting. There are specific techniques you can use to enhance sleep-based consolidation. You're not just passively waiting for sleep to do its work. You can actively prime the consolidation process. The most powerful technique is the pre-sleep review protocol. In the 10 minutes before you go to sleep, your brain is in a unique state. The transition from waking to sleeping involves specific brainwave patterns that are highly receptive to memory prioritization. Information you engage with during this window gets flagged for consolidation. Here's the protocol. In the final 10 minutes before sleep, not while scrolling your phone, not while watching television, but in a quiet, low-stimulation environment, review the most important concepts you learned that day. Don't restudy. Don't work through problems. Just review. Pull out the brief notes you made during the documentation phase of your 20-minute sessions. Read through them slowly. For each concept, pause and try to recall the key points without looking. Visualize the information. Connect it mentally to things you already know. This review accomplishes two things. First, it activates the neural patterns associated with that information, priming them for replay during slow-wave sleep. Second, it signals to your brain that this information is important enough to revisit at day's end, which influences consolidation priority. Studies from the University of Notre Dame found that information reviewed before sleep was retained significantly better than information reviewed at other times of day, even when total review time was identical. The timing matters. Your brain treats pre-sleep information as high priority. There's an important caveat. This pre-sleep window should be low stimulation. No screens, no intense problem solving, no stress-inducing material. The goal is gentle review, not new learning. If you're too cognitively activated, you'll have trouble falling asleep, which defeats the purpose entirely. Now let me give you another comparison between average and elite learners. Average learners have no pre-sleep routine related to learning. Their final hour before bed involves screens, social media, stressful emails, or passive entertainment. They go to sleep with their brain in a scattered, overstimulated state. Whatever random content they consumed last is what gets prioritized for processing. Elite learners have a deliberate pre-sleep protocol. They end screen time at least 30 minutes before bed. They spend 10 minutes reviewing key learning from the day. They create a transition period that shifts their brain from consumption mode to consolidation mode. Their sleep serves their learning goals because they've designed it to. The difference compounds over months and years. Night after night, the elite learner is consolidating more effectively. The average learner is leaving learning gains on the table every single night without realizing it. There's another sleep-based technique that research strongly supports: the strategic nap. A nap between 90 minutes and 2 hours after a morning learning session has been shown to dramatically improve retention. This effect, documented by researchers at multiple institutions including the University of California and the Max Planck Institute, occurs because the nap provides an early consolidation opportunity, a chance for your brain to begin the transfer process before nighttime sleep. The optimal learning nap is 10 to 20 minutes, long enough to enter light sleep, where some consolidation begins, but short enough to avoid deep sleep, which can cause grogginess upon waking. Set an alarm. Keep the nap brief. And if possible, time it for early afternoon, when your circadian rhythm naturally dips. A study published in the journal Sleep found that subjects who napped after learning retained 35% more information than subjects who stayed awake for the same period. 35% more retention from a 20-minute nap. That's one of the highest returns on time investment in all of learning science. But napping only works if it doesn't interfere with nighttime sleep. If you have trouble falling asleep at night, napping may not be appropriate for you. The goal is more total consolidation opportunity, not trading nighttime sleep for daytime sleep. Let me give you the complete sleep architecture strategy for optimized learning. First, protect your sleep duration. Aim for 7 to 9 hours consistently. This isn't indulgence, it's neurological necessity. Every hour under 7 costs you consolidation. Second, protect your sleep quality. Keep your bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. Limit alcohol, which fragments sleep architecture and suppresses REM. Limit caffeine after early afternoon, as it has a half-life of 5 to 6 hours and can disrupt deep sleep even if you fall asleep easily. Third, implement the pre-sleep review protocol. 10 minutes of gentle review before bed, low stimulation, no screens. Review your notes from the day. Activate the patterns you want consolidated. Fourth, consider strategic naps. If your schedule allows, a 10 to 20-minute nap in early afternoon can provide significant retention benefits, especially after a morning learning session. Fifth, maintain consistency. Go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, including weekends. Your brain's consolidation processes are tied to circadian rhythm. Irregular sleep schedules disrupt the timing and reduce consolidation efficiency. Here's your action step for this chapter. Design your pre-sleep learning review ritual. Decide what time you'll begin your wind-down period, at least 30 minutes before your target sleep time. Decide where you'll keep your learning notes for easy access. Decide how you'll review: reading, recalling, visualizing. Then implement it tonight. Also, assess your current sleep architecture. Are you getting enough total sleep? Is your sleep quality compromised by screens, alcohol, caffeine, or irregular schedules? Identify one change you can make this week to improve your sleep for learning. Remember, sleep is not time away from learning. Sleep is when learning becomes permanent. Protect it accordingly. You now have the complete 7-step system: neural priming, strategic forgetting, 20-minute immersion, pattern recognition, interleaving, systems over motivation, and now sleep architecture. But there's one threat to your progress that we haven't addressed. One invisible enemy that undermines everything you've learned. One habit that affects 94% of learners and destroys retention, damages focus, and makes consistent learning nearly impossible. It's not lack of time. It's not lack of intelligence. It's not even lack of the right techniques. It's distraction. The constant, pervasive, engineered distraction that follows you everywhere through the device in your pocket. In the next chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how distraction destroys learning at the neurological level, why willpower alone can't defeat it, and how to create what I call a focus fortress that protects your learning time from the most sophisticated attention capture systems ever designed. Chapter 9. The number one learning killer and how to eliminate it. There's one invisible enemy destroying your learning progress right now, and you're probably feeding it. It's not lack of time. It's not lack of motivation. It's not even lack of the right techniques. You now have all the tools you need: neural priming, spaced repetition, the 20-minute protocol, pattern recognition, interleaving, systems design, sleep optimization. These techniques work. The science is clear. But there's something that can neutralize all of them. Something that fragments your attention so severely that even the best learning strategies produce minimal results. Something so pervasive that 94% of learners are affected by it without fully realizing what it's costing them. That something is distraction. Specifically, the constant, engineered, deliberately addictive distraction delivered through the device in your pocket, the tabs on your browser, and the notifications demanding your attention every few minutes. And in this chapter, I'm going to show you exactly how distraction destroys learning at the neurological level and how to defeat it. Let me start with a number that will reframe how you think about interruptions. Gloria Mark, a professor of informatics at UC Irvine, has spent over 2 decades studying attention and distraction in modern environments. Her research produced a finding that should terrify anyone trying to learn. After a single interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes and 15 seconds to fully return to the original task. 23 minutes from one interruption. Think about what this means. If you sit down for a learning session and check your phone just once, just a quick glance at a notification, you don't lose 10 seconds. You lose 23 minutes of cognitive recovery time. Your brain has to reload context, rebuild focus, and re-engage with the material you were processing. Now think about how often interruptions actually happen. Mark's research found that knowledge workers are interrupted or self-interrupt every 3 to 5 minutes on average. Not every 23 minutes, every 3 to 5 minutes. This means most people never achieve full focus. They're perpetually in the recovery phase, never reaching the deep processing state where real learning occurs. This is the distraction trap, and you're almost certainly caught in it. But interruption frequency is only part of the problem. There's a deeper neurological cost that researcher Sophie Leroy at the University of Washington identified. She called it attention residue. When you switch from one task to another, say, from studying to checking email, part of your attention stays behind. Your brain doesn't make clean transitions. Even after you've returned to studying, cognitive resources are still allocated to the email you just read. You're thinking about the message. You're processing whether it needs a response. You're wondering what else might be in your inbox. This residue degrades performance significantly. Leroy's studies found that people performing tasks with attention residue showed substantially lower cognitive function than those with full attention. They made more errors. They processed information more slowly. They formed weaker memories. Every time you quickly check something else, you create attention residue that compromises your learning for the next 20 to 30 minutes. The check takes 10 seconds. The cost lasts half an hour. This is why multitasking during learning is so catastrophically ineffective. You're not doing 2 things at once. Your brain can't actually do that. You're switching rapidly between tasks, accumulating attention residue with each switch, never achieving the focused state that learning requires. Here's a comparison that illustrates this principle. Average learners study with their phone on the desk. They think, I won't check it unless something important comes up. But the mere presence of the phone creates cognitive load. Studies from the University of Texas found that having a smartphone visible, even face down, even silenced, reduces available cognitive capacity. Your brain is unconsciously monitoring for the device, allocating resources to that monitoring, leaving less for learning. Elite learners study with their phone in another room, not face down, not silenced, physically removed from the environment. They understand that willpower is insufficient against engineered distraction. They don't rely on self-control to resist checking. They remove the option entirely. This difference seems small. It's just moving a phone a few meters away. But the cognitive impact is measurable and significant. Same study time, same material, dramatically different retention, because one learner has full cognitive resources and the other is leaking attention to a device that isn't even being used. Now let me explain why willpower alone can't solve this problem. The apps on your phone, the platforms you use, the notifications you receive, these aren't designed neutrally. They're engineered by teams of behavioral psychologists, neuroscientists, and designers whose explicit goal is to capture and hold your attention. They use variable reward schedules, social validation triggers, urgency cues, and dozens of other techniques refined through billions of data points. You are fighting against the most sophisticated attention capture systems ever created. Systems backed by billions of dollars in research and development. Systems optimized across billions of users to find exactly what makes humans unable to look away. Willpower is no match for this. Deciding to focus better is like deciding to beat a chess supercomputer by trying harder. The asymmetry is too great. You need a different strategy. That strategy is environmental design. Instead of relying on willpower to resist distraction, you engineer your environment so that distraction isn't possible. You don't fight the enemy. You build walls that keep the enemy out. I call this approach building a focus fortress. And here's how to construct one. Layer 1 is device removal. During your designated learning time, your phone is not in the room, not on silent, not face down, physically elsewhere. If you need your computer for learning, use website blockers that prevent access to distracting sites. Tools like Freedom, Cold Turkey, or Focus let you block specific sites or the entire internet for predetermined periods. The block should be difficult to disable, not something you can turn off with a click when your willpower wavers. Layer 2 is notification elimination. Before your learning session begins, close every application you don't need. Disable notifications at the system level, not just within apps. If you're on a Mac, use Do Not Disturb. If you're on Windows, use Focus Assist. The goal is that nothing, not a message, not an email, not a news alert, can interrupt your session. Layer 3 is environmental cues. Your learning environment should signal to your brain that focus is expected. This might mean a specific location you only use for learning. It might mean a specific pair of headphones you only wear when studying. It might mean a small ritual you perform at the start of each session. 3 deep breaths, a stated intention, then beginning. These cues train your brain to enter focus mode automatically. Layer 4 is temporal boundaries. Decide in advance exactly when your learning session starts and exactly when it ends. This bounded time creates psychological clarity. You're not vaguely studying for a while. You're doing a focus session from 9 to 9:30. Knowing the end point is defined makes it easier to maintain focus throughout. Layer 5 is the accountability artifact. Before each session, write down one sentence, what you will accomplish in this session. After each session, write down one sentence, what you actually accomplished. This simple documentation creates accountability to yourself. It also makes distraction visible. If you write completed chapter review, but actually spent 20 minutes checking notifications, the gap becomes obvious. Here's another comparison between average and elite learners, this time focused on how they think about distraction. Average learners treat focus as a personality trait. They think some people are naturally focused and others aren't. They say things like, "I just can't concentrate for long periods." They view their distractibility as fixed, part of who they are, something they have to work around rather than solve. Elite learners treat focus as an environmental outcome. They understand that focus isn't something you have. It's something your environment produces or prevents. They say things like, "My environment wasn't set up for concentration." They view distractibility as a design problem with a design solution. They don't blame themselves for being distracted in distracting environments. They change the environment. This mindset shift is liberating. You don't need more discipline. You don't need to become a different person. You need to build a different environment. Focus is the natural result when distractions are removed. Your job isn't to generate focus through effort. It's to protect focus through design. Let me give you one more technique, the single tasking protocol. Most people approach learning sessions with multiple tabs open, multiple objectives in mind, and a readiness to shift between tasks as needed. This fragmented approach ensures shallow processing. You're never fully present with any single task. The single-tasking protocol inverts this. For each learning session, you have one objective. Not two or three, one. Before you begin, you close everything unrelated to that objective. You write the objective down, and you commit. For the duration of this session, this one thing is the only thing. If another task pops into your mind, an email you need to send, an errand you need to run, you don't switch to it. You write it on a parking lot list and immediately return to your single focus. The parking lot captures the thought so your brain can release it, but you don't act on it until after the session ends. This protocol feels constraining. You'll feel the urge to quickly handle that other thing. But that urge is exactly what you're training yourself to resist. Every time you maintain single focus despite the urge to switch, you're building the capacity for deeper attention. Research on expert performers across domains, musicians, athletes, surgeons, programmers, consistently finds that elite performance correlates with the ability to sustain single focus for extended periods. This ability isn't innate. It's developed through practice. And the single-tasking protocol is how you practice. Here's your action step for this chapter. Conduct a distraction audit of your current learning environment. For your next learning session, keep a piece of paper nearby. Every time you feel the urge to check something, your phone, your email, a different tab, make a tally mark. Don't judge yourself. Just count. At the end of the session, look at the number. That's how many times your learning was threatened by distraction. Even if you resisted every urge, each urge consumed cognitive resources. Then design your focus fortress. Write down specific changes you'll make in each layer. Device removal, notification elimination, environmental cues, temporal boundaries, and accountability artifacts. Implement these changes for your next session and compare the distraction tally. Most people are shocked by how many distraction urges they experience, and how much better they learn when those urges are eliminated through environment design rather than suppressed through willpower. You now have the complete system. Every technique, every principle, every strategy for learning anything faster than you ever thought possible. Neural priming prepares your brain to receive. Strategic forgetting creates the difficulty that makes memories permanent. The 20-minute protocol matches your learning to your brain's attention cycles. Pattern recognition lets you see structures instead of isolated facts. Interleaving builds discrimination and transfer. Systems design makes learning automatic regardless of motivation. Sleep architecture consolidates your daily learning into long-term memory. And the focus fortress protects your attention from the engineered distractions trying to steal it. But knowledge without implementation is worthless. Understanding without action is entertainment, not transformation. In the final chapter, I'm going to give you exactly what you need to turn everything you've learned into lasting change. A complete 30-day implementation system. Week by week, day by day. A specific roadmap that takes you from knowing these techniques to living them, starting Monday morning. Because 30 days from now, you could be a completely different learner. And the final chapter shows you exactly how. Chapter 10, your 30-day rapid learning system. 30 days from now, you could be a completely different learner. Here's the exact roadmap. You've spent the last 9 chapters rewiring how you think about learning. You understand why traditional methods fail. You know how your brain actually acquires, processes, and retains information. You have 7 powerful techniques backed by decades of research from the world's leading institutions. But understanding isn't transformation. Knowledge isn't skill. The gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it, consistently, effectively, permanently, is where most people fail. Not you. Not this time. Because in this final chapter, I'm giving you something more valuable than another technique. I'm giving you a complete implementation system. 30 days, broken into 4 phases, with specific actions for each week. A roadmap that takes you from where you are now to a fundamentally different relationship with learning. Follow this system, and by day 30, these techniques won't be things you know. They'll be things you do, automatically, without thinking, part of who you are. Let's begin. Phase 1 is foundation. This covers days 1 through 7. The goal of week 1 is not to learn as much as possible. The goal is to establish the infrastructure that makes accelerated learning sustainable. Day 1 is Environment Day. Your only task is to build your focus fortress. Designate your learning location, a specific chair, desk, or corner that you'll use exclusively for focused learning. Remove distractions from this space. Set up your device protocols, where your phone will go during sessions, which website blockers you'll use, how notifications will be disabled. Prepare your materials so they're accessible without friction. This single day of setup will pay dividends for the entire month. Day 2 is Trigger Day. Identify your anchor habit, the existing behavior you'll attach your learning to. Remember the formula. After I do X, I will do Y. Write this down. Post it somewhere visible. Then do your first learning session, even if it's just 10 minutes, immediately after your anchor habit. The goal today isn't duration, it's establishing the trigger. Day 3 is your first full 20-minute immersion session. Use the complete protocol. 2 minutes for transition. Close everything. Remove your phone. Take 3 breaths. State your intention. 10 minutes for acquisition. Engage actively with your material for your 30-day goal. 5 minutes for consolidation. Eyes closed. Mental review. No new input. 3 minutes for documentation. Write down 2 or 3 key takeaways. Tonight, do your first pre-sleep review of those takeaways. Day 4 is Spacing Day. Do not study your primary material today. This feels wrong. Your instinct is to maintain momentum through daily repetition. Resist that instinct. Today, let the forgetting process begin. If you feel the urge to review, remind yourself, the forgetting is building storage strength. Instead of studying, spend 10 minutes refining your focus fortress or reviewing your trigger design. Day 5 is your first retrieval session. Without looking at any notes, try to recall everything you learned on day 3. Write it down. Struggle with it. Only after you've exhausted your recall should you check your notes to fill gaps. This struggle is the point. This is where memory becomes durable. Tonight, pre-sleep review of both the original takeaways and the gaps you identified. Day 6 is Pattern Mapping Day. Take 15 to 20 minutes to create your first pattern map for your learning goal. Identify chunks, natural groupings within your subject. Sketch the schema, how these chunks relate. Identify first principles, the foundational truths everything builds from. This map will guide the rest of your month. Day 7 is Review and Refine Day. Look back at your first week. What worked? What created friction? Adjust your environment, your trigger, your timing. Do a 20-minute session incorporating what you've learned. Then rest. You've built the foundation. By the end of week 1, you have a distraction-free learning environment, an automatic trigger for daily learning, experience with the 20-minute protocol, your first spacing and retrieval cycle initiated, a pattern map of your domain, and adjustments based on real experience. Phase 2 is acceleration. This covers days 8 through 21. Now that the foundation is set, you increase intensity and introduce more advanced techniques. During week 2, you'll add interleaving. If your learning goal has multiple components, and most do, begin mixing them within sessions. Instead of mastering component A before touching component B, practice both in the same session. Remember, this will feel less productive. Your performance during practice will seem worse. Trust the research. The retention will be dramatically better. Your schedule for week 2 looks like this. Days 8, 10, and 12 are full 20-minute immersion sessions with interleave content. Days 9, 11, and 13 are spacing days with brief retrieval practice. Just 5 minutes of recall without notes. Day 14 is a comprehensive retrieval session. Try to recall everything you've learned across both weeks. Map what you remember. Identify gaps. This becomes your focus for week 3. During week 3, you'll focus on gap filling and connection building. The retrieval session on day 14 revealed what's solid and what's weak. Now you target the weak points while maintaining the strong ones. Days 15, 17, and 19 are focused 20-minute sessions targeting identified gaps. Use neural priming specifically for these weak areas before each session. Days 16, 18, and 20 are spacing days with interleaved retrieval. mixing strong and weak areas to build discrimination. Day 21 is another comprehensive retrieval session, followed by updating your pattern map with new connections you've discovered. By the end of week 3, you have 3 weeks of consistent practice triggered automatically, multiple complete spacing cycles for early material, interleaving integrated into your practice structure, gap identification and targeted remediation, and an evolving pattern map showing deepening understanding. Here's a comparison of how average and elite learners approach this critical middle phase. Average learners lose momentum in weeks 2 and 3. The initial excitement has faded. The material is getting harder. Progress feels slower than expected. They start skipping sessions. They tell themselves they'll catch up later. By day 21, many have quietly abandoned the project. Elite learners expect the middle phase to feel hard. They know that the absence of motivation is normal and irrelevant. They don't evaluate their commitment based on how they feel. They evaluate it based on whether they showed up. They use their minimum viable session on difficult days. They trust the system even when the system doesn't feel exciting. They understand that consistency through the hard middle is what separates transformation from another abandoned attempt. This is where your system's design from Chapter 7 pays off. You're not relying on motivation to carry you through week 3. You're relying on triggers, environment, and identity. The system runs whether you feel like it or not. Phase 3 is integration. This covers days 22 through 28. You've built the foundation. You've accelerated through the middle phase. Now you integrate everything into a sustainable long-term practice. During week 4, you shift from learning new material to consolidating and connecting existing material. Your sessions focus on retrieval across all content, pattern recognition across different areas, and application to real-world situations. Days 22 and 24 are comprehensive retrieval sessions, full recall attempts across everything you've learned. Days 23 and 25 are application sessions. Take what you've learned and use it. Solve real problems. Create something. Teach someone else. Application is the ultimate test of learning. Days 26 and 27 are connection sessions. Look for patterns across different areas. Update your schema. Identify how concepts relate to each other and to things you already knew before this month. Day 28 is assessment day. Compare where you are now to where you were on day 1. Document your progress in concrete terms. What can you do now that you couldn't do before? What do you understand now that was confusing before? This documentation isn't just celebration, it's evidence. Evidence that the system works. Evidence you'll need on future difficult days to remind yourself that consistency produces results. Phase 4 is perpetuation. This covers days 29 and 30, but really it covers the rest of your life. Day 29 is system design day. You've been following my 30-day structure. Now you design your own. Based on what you've learned about yourself this month, when you focus best, how long your optimal sessions are, which techniques resonate most, create your personal learning system for the next 90 days. What's your next learning goal? How will you structure your weeks? What adjustments will you make based on this month's experience? Day 30 is identity day. This is the most important day of the entire 30 days. On day 30, you don't study. You reflect. You write a statement of identity. Not who you want to be, who you now are. I am someone who learns every day. I am someone who works with my brain, not against it. I am someone who builds systems instead of relying on motivation. I am someone who protects focus because I know what it produces. I am someone who uses spacing, retrieval, and interleaving because I know they work. I am someone who treats sleep as part of learning, not competition for it. I am someone who can learn anything because I know how learning actually works. Write your version. Make it specific. Make it true. Because after 30 days of consistent action, it is true. You've proven it through behavior. Now you're encoding it as identity. Here's the final comparison between average and elite learners. Average learners treat learning projects as temporary. They have a goal. They pursue it for a while. They achieve it or don't, and then they return to their default state. Learning is something they do sometimes, not something they are. Elite learners treat learning projects as identity building. Each project isn't just about the skill acquired. It's about reinforcing who they are. They finish a 30-day sprint, and immediately begin planning the next one. Not because they're obsessed or compulsive, but because continuous learning is simply part of their identity. They can't imagine not having a learning project in progress. That's who they are. This identity shift is the ultimate outcome of this book. Not the techniques. The techniques are just tools. The outcome is becoming someone who learns effectively as a natural expression of who they are. Let me give you the troubleshooting guide for common obstacles. If you miss a day, don't try to make it up with a double session. Just resume the next day as planned. Consistency matters more than perfect adherence. 1 missed day is nothing. 2 missed days is a risk. 3 missed days is a pattern you need to address. If you hit 3, stop and diagnose. What's causing the misses? Environment? Trigger? Timing? Fix the system. Don't blame yourself. If the material feels too hard, zoom out. Return to your pattern map. Make sure you have the foundational concepts solid before building higher. Use more neural priming. Break the material into smaller chunks. Hard material isn't a sign to give up, it's a sign to adjust your approach. If you feel like you're not making progress, check your retrieval. Can you actually recall what you've learned without notes? If not, you have a retrieval problem, not a learning problem. Add more spacing. Add more active recall. The feeling of progress often lags behind actual progress by a week or 2. Here's your final action step. Create your 30-day calendar. Block out the specific sessions for each day. Set up your environment today. Identify your trigger today. Commit to day 1 tomorrow. Don't wait until conditions are perfect. Don't wait until you have more time. Don't wait until you feel ready. The system works regardless of conditions, time pressure, or feelings of readiness. That's the point. 30 days. That's all that stands between who you are now and who you could be. Someone who doesn't struggle to learn because they know how learning works. Someone who doesn't rely on motivation because they've built systems that don't require it. Someone who doesn't fight their brain because they've learned to work with it. You're not someone who struggles to learn. You're someone who works with their brain. And starting tomorrow, you're going to prove it. The system is complete. The roadmap is clear. Now go learn something. Bonus chapter: The 5 Deadliest Learning Mistakes and Their Fixes. 93% of learners are making at least 3 of these mistakes right now, and each one is silently destroying their progress. You've learned the complete system. 7 steps backed by neuroscience. A 30-day implementation plan. But knowing the right techniques isn't enough. You also have to stop doing the wrong things. These are the silent killers. The habits that feel productive but destroy retention. The approaches that seem logical but fight your brain's natural architecture. For each mistake, I'll show you why it's damaging and the specific fix that eliminates it. Deadly mistake number 1. Confusing recognition with recall. This tricks more learners than any other mistake. Here's how it works. You read a chapter, highlight key passages, review your highlights later. The information looks familiar. You think, yes, I know this. You feel confident and move on. But you don't know it. You recognize it. And recognition is not recall. Recognition means identifying information when you see it again. Recall means producing information from nothing, without any cues. Recognition is passive and easy. Recall is active and hard. Only recall builds durable, usable knowledge. The problem is that recognition feels like learning. When you reread notes and everything looks familiar, your brain interprets that familiarity as mastery. This is the fluency illusion, and it's responsible for more failed exams and forgotten skills than any other factor. Research from Washington University found that students using recognition-based methods, rereading, reviewing highlights, performed 50% worse on delayed tests than students using recall-based methods. Same material, same time, half the results. The fix: flip your ratio. Spend 70% of study time in production mode, testing yourself, writing from memory, explaining concepts without notes. Every time you're tempted to reread, close the book and recall instead. The struggle you feel isn't failure, it's the learning happening. Deadly mistake number 2. Learning in order of presentation instead of order of importance. When you start a course or textbook, information comes in a predetermined sequence designed by someone else for a general audience. Most learners follow obediently, Chapter 1, then 2, then 3. They trust that the structure has been optimized. But the order of presentation is almost never the order of importance for your specific goals. The creator doesn't know what you already understand. They don't know your gaps. They don't know which 20% of content gives you 80% of results. When you learn an order of presentation, you spend enormous time on irrelevant content while missing what's critical for your actual needs. Average learners complete courses in order and measure progress by percentage complete. Elite learners preview entire courses first, identify high-value sections, jump to what's most relevant, skip what they know, and measure progress by capability acquired. The fix: before starting any resource, spend 10 minutes previewing the entire structure. Identify the 3 to 5 sections most relevant to your specific goal. Start there, regardless of position in the sequence. Fill in other sections only when gaps become apparent. Your learning path should be designed by you, for you. Deadly mistake number 3: practicing until you get it right, instead of until you can't get it wrong. There's a moment in every practice session when you finally succeed. You solve the problem correctly. You perform the technique properly. Most learners stop there, thinking, "I got it. Time to move on." This is a catastrophic error. Getting something right once means almost nothing. It could be luck. It could be short-term memory. One correct performance isn't evidence of learning. It's evidence of a single successful attempt. Research from the University of South Florida found that participants who continued practicing after initial mastery retained skills 300% longer than those who stopped at first success. 300%, just from practicing past the point where it felt done. The fix: don't stop when you get it right. Stop when you can't get it wrong. After solving a problem correctly, do it 3 to 5 more times. Vary conditions slightly. Test yourself the next day with no warm-up. If you can still perform correctly, you're approaching mastery. If you struggle, you stop too early. The extra 5 minutes past initial success is worth more than the first 20 minutes. Deadly mistake number 4: studying your strengths and avoiding your weaknesses. Human psychology has a consistent bias. We gravitate toward what we're good at. Practicing strengths feels good: competence, flow, satisfaction. Practicing weaknesses feels bad: frustration, confusion, failure. So learners unconsciously allocate more time to areas where they're competent and less to areas where they struggle. This feels productive. You see correct answers and successful performances. But you're not learning. You're rehearsing. And rehearsing what you already know produces zero growth. A study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology tracked how students allocated study time when given control. The finding: students spent disproportionately more time on easier material and avoided difficult material, the exact opposite of optimal strategy. Average learners allocate time based on comfort, refining strengths while ignoring weaknesses. Elite learners allocate time based on weakness, knowing that struggle produces more growth per minute than comfort ever could. The fix: after each session, identify your weakest area, the concept you understand least, the skill you perform worst. Make it the focus of your next session. Chase the struggle. The discomfort is the signal that you're actually growing. Deadly mistake number 5: isolating learning from application. Someone wants to learn public speaking. They buy books, watch courses, study techniques, take notes on best practices. They spend months accumulating knowledge, all before actually speaking publicly. This seems logical. Learn first, then apply. But it fundamentally misunderstands how skill acquisition works. Your brain doesn't separate learning mode from application mode. Neural pathways are context-specific. Knowledge acquired in isolation, reading about speaking while sitting alone, builds pathways optimized for that context. Those pathways don't transfer automatically to standing before an audience. Research on transfer consistently shows that the person who gives 10 mediocre speeches while learning outperforms the person who studies for months before their first speech. Average learners create artificial separation between learning and doing. They want to feel ready before applying. Elite learners integrate application from day one, embracing imperfect early attempts as essential to the process. The fix: apply before you feel ready. Whatever you're learning, Use it within the first week, even partially, even imperfectly. Here's your action step. Audit yourself against all 5 mistakes. Be brutally honest. Score yourself on each one. Then pick just one weakness. Design a 10-minute daily drill to attack it. Start today. You're someone who works with their brain, not against it. Prove it.